Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. I'm Phil Sanchez. Congressman Jim Banks says every Indiana city should end any sister city arrangements with China. Those comments came during a wide-ranging interview with our government reporter Garrett Bergquist. Banks last week took part in a hearing on potential Chinese threats, including through sister city agreements. He talked with All Indiana Politics about the hearing, the ongoing crisis in the Middle East, and a potentially problematic endorsement from Indiana's Secretary of State.
Joining us now is Congressman Jim Banks. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Good to be back.
You dropped off your campaign signatures and those of Donald Trump on Thursday. Now, while you were there, Secretary of State Diego Morales endorsed you using a photo that was taken in his office. Was that an appropriate use of taxpayer-funded resources? Should he have done that at another time and place or even at all?
Well, first of all, the Secretary of State has a formal role to play for candidates who are filing for office, and that's all that happened yesterday. He took a photo with me, put it on his official page. He's taken photos with, I think, almost anyone that stopped by to file to be on the ballot. So there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. He did later endorse me on his campaign email, and I'll leave it up to him to explain that email and what resources he used to do it. But Diego Morales is a friend of mine. He works very hard as the Secretary of State, and I'm really proud to have his endorsement.
I want to turn to the border negotiations. From what you've heard of the Senate deal, would you support it if it came to the House? Well,
from what I've heard about it, the answer is easily no. I'm very skeptical of the deal, but we don't know enough about it yet. I mean, they've been negotiating this deal for a very long time, and there's still no writing on the wall of what is actually in the deal. I can tell you this, though. The House of Representatives has already passed a strong border security bill. It's called H.R. 2. It goes back to the Trump policies that secured the border, build the wall, end catch and release, and go back to President Trump's very effective Remain in Mexico policy. Joe Biden, on his first day in office, signed executive orders that reversed the Trump border policies, and America is suffering because of it. Over 10 million illegals have come into our country. That's more illegals than the population of the entire state of Indiana. Drugs flowing over the border, and a lot of crime in our country because of it. So Joe Biden could go back and sign an executive order and secure the border today. He doesn't need Congress to do that for him. But the House passed a very strong border bill, and it's just sat in the Senate for nearly a year without them even touching it. So the Senate should start with that, pass the House's bill, H.R. 2, and send it to the president to sign it to secure the border.
Let's talk about the situation in the Middle East. We just lost 3 service members in a drone attack in Jordan. The Biden administration blames Iran-backed militias for that. At this point, what should the U.S. response be?
Well, an immediate response against those who are responsible for killing 3 of our heroes, and that hasn't happened yet. Another weak, empty response from the weakest commander-in-chief that we've ever had in the White House, and that's deeply troubling to me as someone who wore the uniform. That means that our troops around the world are vulnerable because Joe Biden's not striking back against people who have struck down and killed American troops. So Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And when you appease them and give them money like Obama did with the Iran nuclear deal, that money funnels directly to Iran proxy groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Yet Joe Biden came into office and in the very beginning of the Biden presidency wanted to renegotiate another deal with Iran and give them relieve sanctions and give them money, let the money flow back to Iran. Donald Trump, through his maximum pressure campaign, sanctioned Iran. He took out Soleimani, the biggest terrorist in the world. And the Iranians and their proxy groups were afraid of that type of action. That's peace through strength, and that speaks volumes to our enemies. Right now, our enemies like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they're not afraid of America, and that's why they're all acting out, and the world is a far more dangerous place today because of Joe Biden's policies than what they were when Donald Trump was in office. So a swift response, an immediate response to go after those Houthi terrorists who killed Americans would have been the right response, but it's been over a week since it happened. So This is it's disturbing, it's dangerous, and it just goes to show how weak Joe Biden is as president.
You were part of a hearing on, among other things, sister city agreements with China earlier in the week. You've asked the city of Carmel specifically to end its sister city agreement with a corresponding city in China. If we do that specific step, do we risk further worsening diplomatic relations with China?
Well, these agreements are dangerous. The FBI has warned us in Congress. The sister cities agreements, like the Confucius Institutes, are part of an umbrella operation by Communist China called the United Front, which the FBI has warned us is part of their espionage effort. They use it to push their propaganda in America. A really disturbing Washington Post story last week about the former mayor of Carmel going to China in his final weeks in office. He was wined and dined, expensive liquor, massages, and in the midst of all that, he signed a new sister cities agreement. And the Washington Post profiled this. That's why I brought it to the attention of the new mayor, Sue Finkham, who's a really great leader for Carmel. And I'm glad to hear that her lawyers are reviewing the agreement that the former mayor signed to make sure that the city of Carmel is not giving anything up to the biggest enemy that we face in the world today, and that's Communist China. So these sister city agreements are dangerous. To give you an example, Prague just ended its sister cities agreement with China because they refused there in their country to go along with the one China policy and acknowledge that Taiwan was owned by China. So is that the same thing that the former mayor of Carmel is agreeing to when he signed a sister cities agreement with China? I don't think we really know, but I don't think we should give any room to our biggest enemy to influence America, American cities. The Washington Post story also says that since the Chinese have found Washington less welcome to them, and they're talking about leaders like me who are doing everything that we can to hold China accountable for stealing our jobs, for giving us COVID, and the other things that they've done to try to rule America under our thumb, they're going out to naive mayors around the city to try to get them to sign these agreements and cut deals with China, and I don't think we should go along with it.
Should every city with a sister city agreement with China end it?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, the FBI has warned us about it. The current FBI director has warned us that these deals, the United Front, the Confucius Institutes, are all a part of China's strategy. They're used for espionage. I'm really glad, by the way, that Indiana University, my alma mater, dropped their Confucius Institute a couple of years ago because they became aware of the threats that the Confucius Institutes pose on a college campus. The sister cities agreements are really dangerous. It's a lot like that, and I'm doing everything that I can to draw attention to it and calling on mayors all over the state to drop these agreements. We shouldn't have those in place with our biggest enemy.
All right, coming up, we take a deeper dive and a closer look at the impact of proposed Medicaid cuts on one central Indiana family. All right, welcome back. Families taking care of kids with special needs, specifically those with medically complex issues, are looking closely at legislation they say leaves them with few caregiving options. The state Medicaid agency is still on the hook for answers. Garrett Berquist has been following this for more than a week, and he brings us the story of one family now scrambling for alternatives.
You all right?
Several times a day, Bethany Johnson has to clear her son Landon's lungs.
His muscle tone doesn't allow him to cough anymore, so this is a machine that simulates a cough form. It blows air into his lungs and then it sucks it back out to clear any mucus that he might have.
Landon is 15 and has severe spinal muscular atrophy. About the only movement he can make is to blink for yes and no. Bethany has to care for him 24 hours a day.
It's hard to know his needs if you don't spend a lot of time with him, because it's just like anybody else. You learn their preferences, you learn what they like, you learn what they don't like, and he certainly has preferences just like everybody else.
The FSSA pays Johnson for 70 hours a week of care through its attendant care program for legally responsible individuals.
It's just given us a little bit of a padding to where we don't have to be concerned if emergencies come up, flat tires happen, car trouble happens.
She'll lose that padding on July 1st. The Family and Social Services Administration says it's shutting down the program to help close a $900 million funding gap. Her husband works full-time, but she says it's barely enough to cover her family's needs.
I really struggled the first couple of days. I really struggled. I was depressed because I was thinking, what are we going to do? How are we going to readjust our lives to go back to barely making it?
Families have begun protesting at the State House. During a conference call with the FSSA on Monday, lawmakers said they're frustrated by the answers they've gotten so far.
I've been waiting for 11 days to get numbers. I mean, I would think that before FSSA decided to take these specific steps, there would have been numbers about how many individuals would be impacted and how much it would cost, how much it would save. So where is the data?
I can't personally speak to that. What I can tell you is that we're continuing to work to pull together information, to share it publicly.
The FSSA has proposed an alternative program that would pay by day rather than by hour. Johnson says that wouldn't nearly meet her and Landon's needs. She says skilled nursing or in-home care aren't good options either.
It's a situation where we have a new nurse. She knows nothing of Landon. I have to train her all by myself. So how do I miss work while that's happening, even if I did have a nurse? Or let's say that nurse's family is sick. She can't come in immediately. I can't come in.
Johnson and her husband are checking every expense they have to see where they can save money. She says if the FSSA needs to cut costs, it shouldn't do so at the expense of the most vulnerable.
I think that we need to take a step back and say, hold on, who will this affect? How will it affect? Will lives be lost? And I think there's a real possibility that lives could be lost if this goes through due to lack of care.
The FSSA is taking public comment on the idea until February 16th. It's not accepting any new families, but anyone who is already on the program will continue to receive benefits until July 1st. In Jackson County, I'm Garrett Bergquist for Wish TV, wishtv.com, or follow us on Facebook for more updates.
All right, coming up, Indiana's best political team talks the FSSA Medicaid cuts, Morales' endorsement of Banks, and more. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Laura Beck and Republican Tom John. Good to see you both. Let's begin with that endorsement of Jim Banks by Secretary of State Diego Morales. Tom, the announcement used a photo taken by his official communication staff in his State House office. In your opinion, was this a misuse of taxpayer-funded resources? And since Morales is the state elections officer, should he be endorsing anyone?
Well, everybody has a role as elected officials where they can endorse. They do things both in their role as a political leader in their party and as a government leader. And we haven't had anybody called to task since, in the time that I know of for those sorts of things. So making the endorsement, I see no problem with that. He's a Republican. He's a proud Republican. As for the picture, the fact is, once those things are out, anybody could use it for any purpose. I'm sure it's probably all over Twitter now where people have used it and it's the official office. Perhaps it wasn't the best judgment insofar as it raised this issue, but the fact of the matter is it's really a big nothing burger.
Your thoughts, Laura?
Well, I think it's interesting that Tom said that he doesn't recall a time of having something like this happen. And I can agree with Tom. This just isn't something that on both sides of the aisle that we normally don't do in that official capacity. Everyone, I think, is always very careful to walk to make sure there is a very clear delineated line between campaign and official. And so I think that clearly was breached there. The bigger issue to me, though, is that I just listened to the interview with Jim Banks, and the first question Jim Banks is talking about is not about a Senate campaign. It's about what happened with Diego Morales. And so I feel like that really shifts the focus from his campaign and really did his campaign a disservice because it becomes all about, once again, a Diego Morales sideshow.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the attendant care situation. The agency says, as you know, it has some alternatives for families, including a per diem payment model. Garrett addressed those in our last segment. You heard it here. Laura, given the massive Medicaid spending gap, is this the way for those families that they can maybe hope for under the circumstances rather?
Well, I mean, I have to separate how I feel emotionally about this, because listening to that story was just heartbreaking. It's shameful what they're doing, frankly. And they've been playing games for years with these budget reversions and reverting budget money back. So it looks like they've got a big surplus. They made a massive mistake. And instead of taking care of our most vulnerable citizens, people who need feeding tubes, who need constant care, whose families, the ones who love them the most and who care about them the most, are their caregivers. Instead of taking care of them, they're trying to make up for a mistake they made by punishing them. And what really also bothers me is that if we are truly going to be a pro-life state, if we are truly a pro-life state in Indiana, then the first thing we do is we protect vulnerable Hoosiers, particularly children with really complicated healthcare needs, as well as their families. So they have a lot of explaining to do. They're not going to be able to kick the can down on the road, because if they wait until July 1st, I think the public outcry and anger, plus the political campaigns with the gubernatorial primary, is really going to hurt them moving forward.
It's a fair point. Tom, could the state simply cover the cost out of its budget surplus?
Well, I mean, I suspect that's a possibility that's open to the General Assembly. I mean, the reality is there was a mistake, there was a misjudgment, whatever the case is, as to the shortfall. And when you do that, just like in a household budget, and you say, okay, we need to tighten our belts, this is something the state's looking at. Whether they could have been more proactive in how they went about it and had more communications and brought people together to discuss the plan, and I think make people aware of what they were trying to do. Yeah, there may be some of that. And this is out for proposed comment. That doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. I think this is what happens in government, right? When things go out for comment and people talk about whether it's in the General Assembly or whether it's in an executive sort of action like this, you will see comments, and you may see this well changed in the process. So I think it's early to take any hard and fast positions on it. But the reality is the state has to look at everything just like anybody would when they have a budget shortfall.
Okay, we'll see what happens with that. Let's turn to national politics now for a moment. Senator Chuck Schumer says that we can expect a border deal this week. House Republicans already called it dead on arrival. Tom, at this point, are Republicans simply stalling to try to get Donald Trump reelected?
Some. I think that's probably true. Others, I think what I've heard is there's a lot of confusion or even lack of understanding or even lack of knowledge as to what may be in this deal. So it's hard for people to say that they will or won't vote for a deal. And I think it is true. You heard Congressman Banks say, there are things that the Biden administration could be doing to secure the border. And instead, at most junctures, they've been affirmatively against trying to protect the border and have tried to roll back things that were done under the Trump administration.
Yeah.
So whether this is necessary, whether it moves the needle, or whether it's just giving Biden a political win, it's a fair question for people to ask, and it'll be interesting to see when the
No doubt. Laura, I want to get you in here. We have less than a minute. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate Tom's point of view, because I do think it has become a complete political quagmire since Donald Trump made it clear that any action on the border helps Joe Biden and hurts him. I will say that the bipartisan deal in the Senate really is much more restrictive and much more conservative than what Democrats have really ever been for before in the future, in the past, particularly because it does it does put a cap on crossings on any given day. So I think we're going to see how it all happens, and we're going to watch it unfold. But
yes, we will.
Politics is definitely playing a role in
and
this.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Good to see you both. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you. We'll be right back. All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics this week. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. You can also find our brand new All Indiana Politics podcast. It's part of the All Indiana Podcast Network. over at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.